Good afternoon, everybody. And for those of you who it may still be morning, thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited to introduce you to our South Australian series. We've literally just released those and we're very excited to get those underway. They're due to leave in February this year, so just around the corner. And I'll be shortly introducing you to one of our fantastic guest lecturers who I'm sure is the main reason you're here to hear all about. But just a little bit about some background before we do get underway. I know that a lot of people are probably interested in, what we've been doing over the past few months, etc., in order to remain safe during these times. So we have had a number of measures, which is all of our ships are capped at under 100 guests. We'll be using the Coral Adventure for this particular expedition. All of our crew and our guests at present are all Australian. And our vessels are Australian flagged as well. So the beauty of that meant that our ships were actually safely alongside here in Cairns, ready to deploy. And we introduced our sail safe plan, would have been back in the mid last year was when we sort of got everything all underway. But it was on board our very first expedition for the Great Barrier Reef last year in October. Where that was the first expedition cruise where we actually had all of that as one of our main features, and that had a huge success. So it has been it's been proven to have worked, which is fantastic. You will hear a little bit more about our sail safe plan throughout the presentation, but absolutely refer to our website for the most up-to-date info on that. And we've got a couple of special offers and things at the moment too, which we will touch on at the end of the presentation as well. So feel free as we're going along, if you do have any questions, to let us know. But without any further ado, I'm actually going to hand you over to the star, which is Quentin Chester, our guest lecturer.
Thanks very much, Ramona, and welcome everybody to today's chat. Great to have you along. And a bit of background, I'm a writer and photographer by trade. I've been working on stories and books for many years now about Australia. I've been writing for Australian Geographic since way back in 1986. So done a lot of different trips to different parts of the world and Australian areas where we get into sort of more remote places, which is a real theme of my writing life. And Coral Expeditions is a nice sort of segue from that, being able to travel by ship, with very minimal impact to the local environment, but still getting remote and being able to explore and discover different parts of Australia, which otherwise would be very hard to reach. So this itinerary in South Australia has been a bit of a dream of mine. I've been working with Coral over the years on other trips and always had this yearning that we might get a Coral Expeditions vessel down into South Australian waters. And this itinerary we put together really reflects the diversity of habitats we have here between the Gulfs and the different peninsulas, nearly 300 or over 350 islands scattered around our shores. So lots of opportunities for people to see and experience those places, areas that very few people get to go and see. So it's a real privilege, a real opportunity, and we're traveling at a time which is going to be quite a good time of the year to travel. Probably one of the most stable weather patterns is through February and into March. So a good season for this part of the world. And it's a real expedition in the sense that we do have an itinerary, we do have places we're going to drop anchor, but there's also a lot of flexibility in the day-to-day activities, in the shore excursions, in the walks and activities that we do. A lot depends on how the weather rolls. We live in the Southern Ocean down here. I'm speaking to you from Kangaroo Island, so a bit of a roller coaster here, but we also get some wonderful, clear, stable days as well. So the itinerary and what we do will basically be dictated a little bit by the sea conditions and the weather conditions, and we'll take advantage of the fact that all the different islands and coastlines here have a lot of options for us. So we can tuck around into the shelter of an island if we need to, get ashore, be able to explore and walk, maybe have a swim. So lots of opportunities to really get the most out of our time traveling through South Australia.
out of the destinations, obviously we can't cover up every single expedition highlight as much as we'd love to. But absolutely, there's probably a few hero highlights that you might have question that you'd love to share with everybody.
Yes, indeed. And we kick off with a little bit of an appetizer for what's to follow. We cross Gulf St Vincent and spend a day on Trowbridge Island, which is on the southeastern tip of York Peninsula. An unusual island for South Australia. This is a sand island. It's a bit of a restless sort of island in the sense that the shape of the island does change over generations according to what the currents and sands are doing. But a very interesting place. It's amongst a whole range of reefs and shoals. And so from an early days of settlement in South Australia, it was seen as being an important place to have a lighthouse. And this wonderful tower here, freshly painted a couple of years ago, still stands tall. And it's a great opportunity to get up close to what is South Australia's second lighthouse, a cast iron tower built in 1856. So we'll be meeting up with the caretakers on the island there, and we'll be doing a bit of a walk around the island. It's quite small and we can do a full circumnavigation on foot. At low tide, there's these wonderful exposed tidal flats. And the other big feature of the island is that it's a very important bird habitat with lots of nesting birds, shorebirds and wading birds, some big pelicans and swans and all sorts of things there, plus penguins as well. Now they're nocturnal and they come ashore, but we may well have a chance to see some of the chicks in the nest and some of the adults in their nests on the island during our visit. So that's the first port of call, and it's a small island, but it gives you a bit of a taste of the habitats we're going to enjoy. And then we cross back across towards Kangaroo Island. We cross across Backstairs Passage to my home patch. I've been based here on the island now for about 11 years. And down in the bottom right of the screen there is my home beach at Antichamber Bay. Just a wonderful, delightful beach, which will be our first main anchorage. And we'll be spending a day there visiting both the beach environment there, but also, if weather permits, we'll get up to Cape Willoughby, where South Australia's first lighthouse is located. And as well as having a wonderful natural environment, it's also got a big history. So South Australia was officially settled in 1836 by Europeans, but there were people making a pioneering life here at Antichamber Bay back 10 years before that, at least 10 years before that, back in the 1820s. So fascinating stories, and we'll be going right into the heartland of that pioneering history when we visit that side of the island. After that, we cruise across the north coast. We head west to Western River Cove, a highly prized location on the island. Western River Cove has this wonderful beach habitat, and we'll be walking inland from Western River past the homestead and having a look at some of the steep terrain there, and also some of the evidence of the recent bushfires that we've had over the last summer, and some of the recovery, some of the good news stories about how the bushland is coming back. From there, once we leave Kangaroo Island, we cross across the bottom of Spencer Gulf over to Memory Cove on the tip of Eyre Peninsula. Just a beautiful enclosed inlet, fantastic clear water. And Memory Cove is very much associated with a vivid story of maritime exploration. Matthew Flinders, aboard the Investigator, was the first to chart these waters, and the days in February that they were there in 1802 were marked by a major tragic accident where they lost 7 members of their crew in a small boat, plus also the ship's master, a man called John Thistle, who was a very close friend of Matthew Flinders. So we'll be exploring the kind of different dimensions of that little boating accident and the aftermath of that whilst we're in the bottom of Eyre Peninsula there. Plus, of course, enjoying the coastal habitat. A lot of wildlife in this part of the world. This is the sort of one of the heartlands for Australian sea lions. So we'll hopefully see some of those in our travels as well.
One of the things I love so much about our Coral Expeditions journeys is, as Quentin was saying, we do try and retrace a lot of the footsteps of past pioneers or expeditioners. So you'll find with a lot of our itineraries, there is that, that beautiful sort of correlation between the old and the new and, reliving all of those stories. So that's definitely a highlight. And I'm sure that Quentin has plenty of those amazing stories to share on the way.
Yes, indeed. And I think it's a real, to be in the physical space where some of these major events happened in early exploration really brings them alive. And you can just imagine what it was like on board these old ships, charting those coastlines back in the day when it was one of the longest unexplored shorelines left in the world. So real pioneering stuff. So once we leave Memory Cove and the southeastern tip of Eyre Peninsula, we swing south around the bottom of Eyre Peninsula, past Whalers Way and some of the big limestone formations there. And then we tuck around onto the western edge of Eyre Peninsula to Coffin Bay, a very contrasting environment to what's on the southern side of the peninsula, a very enclosed bay, very sheltered, and it's a very popular holiday destination and boating destination. Great anchorages there, great beaches, but also famously one of Australia's premier oyster growing regions. So big oyster farms there, beautiful pristine waters of Coffin Bay. The oysters are famous Australia-wide for their fantastic flavour and quality. So we'll be touching base with some of the oyster farmers and getting amongst all of that, hearing their stories and enjoying the kind of taste of the environment, literally, with some of those oysters. And yeah, just a very interesting part of the world, a lot of history there as well, part of the rich fishing culture really of Eyre Peninsula, and Port Lincoln itself is a very big fishing port. And that's a little window on how rich the marine environment is in this part of Australia. Port Lincoln's the biggest fishing fleet in the Southern Hemisphere. So a very important asset for Australia and for South Australia.
And the experience we have there is quite a unique one as well. So rather than just getting to taste the oysters just straight off a plate, we'll actually be heading in. You can see those guys there in their waders. So we're actually going to be heading out in those waders out on the water for an actual in-water dining experience where you get to sample the oysters, just say fresh off the rocks there. So quite off the rocks, off the what do you call them?
The racks.
Yeah, the racks. I'm like, what do they call racks? Yeah.
Yeah, they use different technology for the oysters depending on the farm, but there's some are in baskets and some are on different racks and things. So yeah, we'll be seeing the very much the actual ground zero for oyster farming. Really, we'll be looking at where they're grown and the kind of water quality that they enjoy.
A unique experience.
And then once we leave Coffin Bay, we're pushing up northwestward to Flinders Island, and this is a very interesting place. A lot of history. This is quite a significant island in terms of its size and geography. Has a long farming history. Lots of sheep being grazed over there over the years. But we're now at a bit of a threshold now with the island where the owners of the island are working with the government and conservation groups to change the mix there and treat it more as an area for conservation. So another wonderful initiative of private owners working with scientists and government agencies to create a more sustainable island habitat, which also has big conservation benefits, where with a bit of rehabilitation of some areas, we can then reintroduce animals that will be able to find a new home here on Flinders Island. But we'll be meeting up with the family who they're very experienced people in this part of the world, and we'll be sampling their involved with the abalone industry, and so we'll be sampling some of their wares as well. So that'll be a fascinating story. Again, a wonderful coastline of limestone and granite. If you're interested in geology, this particular trip has some great stories to tell in terms of the evolution of Australia as an independent continent, and the geology that's revealed around the coastline is a big part of telling that story. Flinders Island, we cruise back around into Spencer Gulf, and we push up a little bit further, back up into Spencer Gulf. We visit Thistle Island, and that's another quite sizable island. Very extensive kind of beaches on the north side of the island, lovely sheltered bays, and then a wild cliffy coast on the south side. Lots of wildlife here. There are some houses and accommodation here where people do stay, but it's quite an extensive island. And then from there, we push north up to the Joseph Banks Group and to Cape Donington. The Joseph Banks Group's a very extensive collection of islands. And again, they were farmed in different ways. We had sheep farmers out there, and they used to crop some of the islands as well. But again, a lot of those islands now are being rehabilitated, revegetated, and becoming these important refuges for wildlife that is endangered on the mainland. Some of the smaller mammals now find their home on places like Revesby Island. And Cape Donington's, again, another very historic place. There is a lighthouse there, a much more contemporary lighthouse there, but also a wonderful walk that we want to do there, which will take us up to a very famous monument for the Flinders expedition, and with great views over Boston Bay and the islands out in the Gulf. So another special opportunity. And we do a lot of walks on this trip. This will be a walk to that Stamford Hill, which will be on a well-marked trail, but a lot of the islands are quite remote. And so the walking won't be terribly strenuous, but we won't necessarily be on sort of well-established footpaths. We'll be making our way as best we can on rough nature tracks or animal pads. So it's not going to be terribly demanding walking. We're not climbing any big mountains, but we will be nimble on our feet as we get to the various destinations we walk to.
We often get a few questions, Quentin, about the different types of walks that we might expect on these expeditions. So, I mean, I know that there's a combination of some trails and some beach walks and some sort of lighthouse climbs. In terms of the degrees of difficulty, can you sort of give us a little bit of an insight into what to expect on these ones?
Yeah, so there'll be walks that we would rate as easy, in the sense that they have they're good surfaces, relatively well-prepared trails that don't involve significant ascents or descents. So there'll be some of those. Then there'll be some beach walks where we'll be walking on pretty firm sand closer to the water's edge, maybe not more than 2 or 3 kilometres. But there will be some soft sand at different times as well as we head inland from the coast. We cross through occasionally some dune environments. But typically those softer sand walks will be fairly brief, maybe only 200 or 300 metres to get to firm ground. So there'll be a variety of things. Some of the tracks we'll probably just pick our way through the vegetation as best we can. There'll be some rocky surfaces as well. So as we walk around some of the more remote islands, we'll be walking on the cliff tops, which we won't be walking too close to the edge, but we'll be walking on limestone surfaces, which are quite firm, but there will be a little bit of uneven ground on that, but nothing that would be rated as hard or difficult. So the walks will be generally from easy to moderate in terms of their difficulty. So it's quite achievable. There'll be some lighthouses which we'll climb, which will be you'll be climbing sort of 26 to 40 metres of ascent on some of those towers. Most of these lighthouses have very good stairways with handrails, and it's not a race, so we won't be sprinting up those. We'll be taking good rests as we go up some of the lighthouses. So yeah, it's all done at a fairly moderate sort of pace, with plenty of chance to rest and recuperate. It will be summertime, so we just need to be aware that hats and plenty of water will be required, all the usual things, sunscreen. It will be potentially some warm days for us, but given that we're in the Southern Ocean, through summer we have a bit of a roller coaster of 3 or 4 days of warmer weather, followed by 3 or 4 days of cooler breezes and slightly chillier weather. So plenty of variety in terms of the climate down here in this part of the world.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's definitely a common question that we get, and I guess good to get a bit of an overview of that.
That's right. And Wedge Island's a good example of what we'll be doing in terms of the walks, where those people who perhaps don't want to do terribly long walks can still enjoy aspects of the island. On the north coast, there's a lovely long beach there, which you can walk and in quite good comfort. It'd be quite sheltered. If there's a southerly breeze blowing, it's quite sheltered. But for those who are looking for something a little bit more adventurous, we'll be walking to the crest of the island, the southern headland of the island. And Wedge is one of the taller islands we'll be visiting. There's a small, not really a lighthouse, but a light beacon on the southeastern tip of the island, on top of these huge limestone cliffs. And so that'll be a longer walk in terms of climbing and duration. So that will be something for those who are looking for perhaps a bit more of a challenge. But the payoff for the walk is that we'll get to see some spectacular views, not just of the island itself, but looking across Investigator Strait towards York Peninsula, and perhaps even a view back to Kangaroo Island, depending on how clear the air is looking that way. So yeah, Wedge is a spectacular little island, very famous amongst yachties and people cruising this part of the world, because it's got a fantastic northern beach, quite a safe anchorage for a lot of the boats that cruise between Adelaide and Port Lincoln. So well on the radar for those people who do a bit of sailing.
So you can see that's definitely the Adelaide to Adelaide itinerary. I mean, being an avid photographer yourself, Quentin, and spectacular photography indeed. I've seen some of your work and it's absolutely sensational. Definitely is a bit of a photographer's dream to be on board that expedition.
Indeed. And at this time of the year, spectacular sunrises and sunsets. We'll be at anchor and cruising at different times, which will give us an opportunity to capture some of those dramatic shots. And, you know, the nature of things in this part of the world is beautiful light and, you know, abundant sort of clarity of the air. We get some sort of mistier days occasionally, but generally speaking through February, March, quite clear, stable weather. So we generally have very good light for photography. It's one of my favourite times of the year. Although spring's a lovely time here, I actually think that autumn is perhaps the best months for photography.
I guess another thing to pack would definitely be your binoculars. There's plenty of opportunities on these expeditions around South Australia to, you know, see different types of bird life, you know, all those, the wildlife that we're seeing along the way as well. So definitely keep that in mind, especially as we're crossing this coast here. So our next expedition, which Quentin's going to talk you through a little, is the across the Great Australian Bight. So some of these areas you're absolutely going to want to have your binoculars handy. This one will be a 13-night expedition, so heading from Adelaide through to Fremantle, and that's going to depart in this year, February 2021. So once again, we have way too many highlights to go through everything, but Quentin is definitely going to talk us through a couple of those. So you would have heard some of those amazing highlights that we talked about earlier for Kangaroo Island, but is there anything sort of else on Kangaroo Island that you think is the absolute hero there for us, Quentin?
I think just the north coast of the island. So in southern Australia, north-facing coastlines are pretty rare things. Obviously, Tassie's got a pretty strong north coast to its north side there, but Kangaroo Island has one of the other big north-facing coastlines, and they're pretty impressive places because they're sheltered from the southerly winds, and they often have these beautiful long beaches and bays like Emu Bay, and then Stokes Bay further to the west on Kangaroo Island. And these places were very historic because for settlement and early pioneering farming, the north coast was a place where they could bring ships in to collect farm produce, wool and wheat. And that wasn't really an option on the southern shorelines of South Australia or Kangaroo Island. So it was a foothold for the early pioneers, having those bays and beaches that were able to be accessed by ships way back in the 1860s. And the other highlights on Kangaroo Island is just the natural environment and the wildlife. We have lots of, obviously, wallabies and kangaroos here, but it's a very important bird habitat for South Australia, and lots of woodland birds and coastal birds. So for those people who are interested in the bird world, it's a great opportunity. So that next trip swings through to Coffin Bay again, and again, reliving those experiences that we talked about earlier. So another great opportunity there. And then from Coffin Bay, the cruise heads up to the Noitz Archipelago. Now, this is, again, a very big landmark in maritime history. This was as far east as the Dutch got in their first explorations here, way back in 200 years before Matthew Flinders was here. And so the Noitz Archipelago is another impressive natural habitat, a big refuge for a lot of wildlife, including marine mammals, and a lot of smaller mammals that basically almost went extinct on the mainland. So it's an important conservation zone. And the Noitz Archipelago was, interestingly, also some of the inspiration for Gulliver's Travels. So Jonathan Swift, the famous British author, was reading some of these early accounts from the Dutch exploration of this part of the world, and this location was part of the inspiration for Gulliver's Travels, so a bit of a literary connection there. And from the Noitz Archipelago, the voyage comes right across the dramatic Great Australian Bight, one of the great coastlines in the world, the largest limestone coastline and limestone surface on the planet. Very spectacular place, very wild, rugged place, shaped by the Southern Ocean, and big important whale habitat, particularly during winter, a very important breeding habitat for southern right whales. And then from there, we push further westward to some of the fantastic island habitats close to Esperance, and Cape Arid National Park is right on the edge of the Nullarbor Plain, an area that very few people get to, even by car. It's quite a remote, wild place. And so this is where the Coral Adventurer comes into its own and able to bring us in safety and comfort into a part of Australia where is otherwise quite challenging to reach. And Cape Arid is kind of the front door to what is one of the great collections of islands in Australia. So the archipelago of the Resurge is this fantastic group of islands, spans 4,000 square kilometres. There's 150 different islands there, and hundreds of much smaller, what we call islets, so very small islands. So it's a network of islands with these wonderful mainland coasts not far away near Esperance, with these big granite headlands and these stunning white beaches. And Lucky Bay, where that little kangaroo Joey is very famous for the kangaroos who head down to the beach every day, cruise along the sand there, and find themselves in photographs all around the world. And the colours and the vivid nature of the ocean contrasted with the granite formations is a fantastic photo opportunity. The archipelago of the Resurge is an important place. I visited there about 20 years ago and spent a week on Mondrain Island. and one of the most sort of dramatic landings on the island that I can, on any island that I can remember, where we had to jump from the bow of the ship. Now, passengers aboard the Coral Adventurer won't be asked to do any daredevil things. They'll be coming ashore on Woody Island, where there's a very straightforward access to the island itself. But you can see from the images there that the coastlines are these big sloping granite slabs, and most of the islands in the archipelago are these domes of granite which rise up out of the ocean, a bit like, from a distance, they look a bit like whales coming up. They're very domed in their shape, very curved in their profile. And there's fantastic islands to explore. Woody Island's very famous for its environment and access, lots of conservation work done there. And these islands were part of the early pioneering days of sealing and whaling in Australia. They were sort of before settlement, really. In the early 19th century, there were ships and sealers and whalers working these coastlines, and some very colourful stories of some of these characters. They were a bit of a wild bunch, the sealers and whalers, but also a very important part of the maritime exploration that came through here. Obviously, Flinders came through here very early in 1802 and did some of the charting of the coastline back then. And from there, we head a bit further westward through Bremer Bay. Bremer Bay is another wild strip of coastline in WA. Offshore from there is a very famous whale habitat for orcas, and inshore there's southern right whales, which are often sighted here. So big marine mammals, and again, it highlights the power of this habitat, where we've got across this part of South Australia and Western Australia, big populations of seals, whales, and of course, sharks as well. So it's a pretty powerful place where you've got so many of these big animals and top predators that drive part of that food chain. So a very interesting natural history environment and a very wild place. And Bremer Bay, again, a remote area that is pretty remote for most people to reach. And the ship is a great way to get in there and experience that part of the world.
Yeah, we're quite blessed as well with the number of beach landings that we do have. We have our own purpose-built Explorer tenders, so they're actually patented and custom designed for our vessels. So that means that all of our guests on board our Coral Adventurer, we have two on board our Coral Adventurer. So we'll actually bring the guests over to a lot of those beaches in our purpose-built little tenders. So we can get into a lot of those beaches, which traditionally my ships can't get into. So that's the beauty of us being able to sort of visit a lot of these remote islands that are there. We've got such that unique access. So.
Yeah, and the Explorers are fantastic platforms to work from. And as we visit various islands, because of the nature of these islands, we have opportunities, depending on the weather, to find, good sheltered places where we can bring those explorers in. So there's a lot of versatility with both the ship and those tenders in terms of what we can do and how we can adjust the program according to conditions. So from Bremer Bay and Esperance, we head further west to King George Sound and Albany, an iconic harbour really here, a famous place, figured very prominently in the early exploration by the Dutch and the French and the British explorers, known for its terrific natural harbour. And it was also the last port of call for the ships bound for Gallipoli during the First World War. So the last sight of Australia for many of those soldiers who travelled on those voyages was the coastline around Albany. And this is a stunning part of the world. As well as being a busy working port, Albany has these terrific granite coastlines, big formations, lots of beautiful beaches and bays. And again, the granite is a real theme of the coastal topography here. These wonderful granite formations, which just are begging to be photographed, really, because they have the wonderful sort of sculptural character that you get from weathered granite. And naturally, these big headlands provide terrific safe anchorages for a lot of ships and vessels. And as we go further west, we head towards some of the other headlands like Cape Leeuwin, where we've got big lighthouses and very famous locations for ships to avoid, really. So Cape Leeuwin, the southwestern tip of Western Australia, one of the most spectacular lighthouses anywhere in the country. One of the grandest towers, really, a very tall tower. The opportunity to climb that tower is a very special one. Big first order Fresnel lens at the top there, turning around every night. This is where two oceans meet, where the Indian and Southern Ocean really come together, and sometimes with spectacular results, depending on how the ocean swells are rolling. And Augusta and Cape Leeuwin, quite a remote part of WA, even though it's relatively close to Perth. Just the nature of the terrain and the forest and the rugged coastline, it still has a remote atmosphere to it. And very famously, of course, the Margaret River region just to the north of Augusta, with its wine growing regions and a spectacular surf coastline backed by these limestone formations and caves. A really lovely part of Australia. I was there just a couple of years ago visiting with my wife and daughter, who's a wine judge. She was judging at the Margaret River Wine Show, so we had a few wines as well. But we did go to the lighthouses and did enjoy some of the forests and caves and scenery there. So just a really interesting corner of Australia, an iconic region for all sorts of reasons, and a lovely part to explore. And the explorers will be able to get us into places that are pretty hard to reach otherwise once we get our anchorages going.
Of course, as you said, Quentin, a trip to this region wouldn't be complete without a wine experience. So, of course, we're definitely going to be taking in a wine experience in this region.
Yeah, and it's one of the great wine growing districts, really. A very favourable climate for viticulture, and very famous for its red wines, its Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz, but also very famous for Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc as well. So no matter what your wine preference, Margaret River's got something for you. And the wineries and vineyards are in spectacular landscapes and in forested regions, very picturesque kind of rolling country, and a very kind of moderate climate. So the grape growing there is something that a lot of other regions would love to have.
Absolutely.
And the culture of this part of Australia is very interesting, because whilst it's quite sophisticated in terms of its food and wine culture, the beach, the coast, the surf is never far away, and that creates a very kind of Australian feel to what the experience is like. And so a lot of the winemakers and grape growers in this area are very switched on to being out in the environment, to enjoying the coastline, to enjoying riding the waves with their surfboards. So it has a lovely Australian character, which I think is something that we all can relate to. And, at this time in our history, we're looking to explore as much as we can of our own backyard. And if you haven't been to this part of Western Australia, it's a real gem. And I'm sure if it was a little bit closer to the East Coast, we'd all have been there by now. But it is still a marvellous area.
Absolutely. And because of the amazing produce that you can get down in this region as well, it's definitely something that we always try and incorporate into our menu. So one of the signature things we do is, regardless of what location we are in, we try and sort of bring as much of that local produce on board the ship. So you can see that image down there is actually one of our chef prepared meals on board. So we do try and incorporate as much of that local produce where we can.
That's right, and you can the atmosphere around this part of Australia with the beaches and the coastline. I mean, wonderful seafood and just spectacular beaches, and it all the tastes of the place sort of really fit together with the landscape and scenery. The northern side of the coastline here, so Dunsborough is a north-facing stretch of coast, and Cape Naturalist is on the northwestern tip of the southwest there. Beautiful little lighthouse, and this is a slightly smaller lighthouse than the one at Cape Lewin. A very neat little tower. Recently, a lot of work done to restore some of the tower itself, and a great place to visit. A very accessible boardwalk, which was installed just a few years ago. So if you're not so nimble on your feet, then this would be a lighthouse which is very achievable. Great views from here, looking across the coastline, and an opportunity for those who wish to climb inside the tower and see some of the inner workings of the lighthouse. Quite a historic place as well. Obviously, the lighthouse figures very prominently in shipping that was accessing the southwest of WA. And the beaches around here, I mean, my wife and I, we drove down from Perth, and that first afternoon we just walked straight out onto one of these beaches, and it was just, I mean, like coming home almost to Kangaroo Island. It was very spectacular, very wild character as well, even though there's, you know, towns and villages nearby. Very unspoilt coastline.
Absolutely, and you probably would have heard Quentin mention our vessels quite a few times. So the vessel that we'll be using for all of our expeditions will be the Coral Adventurer. So for these two, you can see on the back of the vessel there, down in one of those bottom images, our Explorer tender. So we actually hydraulically lower that from the back of the ship, lowers it down to the back deck level where you can actually just easily walk on and off. And then that's hydraulically lowered down into the water. So it just makes it really easy to get in and out of those vessels. We can use that for our Zodiacs where we do apply those also. So just, yeah, so if you're not, you know, super active on your feet, it is a nice way to just get nice and comfortably in and out of those vessels as well. And then just a really relaxed communal type of feel on board. We don't have specific assigned seating. It's just a communal type of dining room. So super relaxed. And that's the nature of all of our expeditions. They are a very relaxed and immersive type of experience where it's not just about the experience on board, but also about that immersive experience that you're getting off the ship as well. So I'm sure we've probably had a few questions along the way. I haven't seen many pop up. I did actually have Liz here assisting me in case there was any questions, but if anyone does have any additional questions, feel free to ask away. I can see someone's asked if there is a bathroom on board the Explorer. Yes, we do. So on board the Explorer tenders, we do have a marine toilet. There is also a commentary on board. So when Quentin is on board, you can absolutely hear all of his amazing lectures and things from those Explorer tenders. And being that sun canopy as well, you know, when it is quite harsh conditions, sometimes it's fantastic to have that sun protection as well. And then another question is in regards to the social distancing. So as part of our Sail Safe program, it is a requirement that everybody will need to go and see their GP 7 days prior for an examination. And then between 72 to 60 is the ideal time frame. Every guest that is actually going on board is required to undertake a PCR COVID test. That needs to provide a negative result in order to board. So that's two of the major requirements on board. We've also got, you know, of course, the increased hand sanitation and everything on board. But being that our guests have sort of had that pre-test, there's kind of a bit of a bubble on board. So we do have social distancing, but people aren't required to wear masks. And it's not to the extreme measures that you're required in a standard because everyone has had that test. So, yeah. We will also have on all of our expeditions, there'll be either a doctor or a medic on board, and they're there for the purposes of, you know, anything relating to COVID that we require them for. Cool. I can see someone has also asked in-water activities for guests. Yeah, so on both expeditions, we do have a number of in-water activities. Some of them might be just a swimming location, or there is opportunities for snorkeling as well, and one opportunity for some diving also. For our snorkeling, we do include snorkeling equipment on any of our expeditions that actually have the opportunity for snorkeling. So they're all included, and then diving can be an optional extra. On the particular location with the dive, it is for certified only. So any other questions there, guys, for myself or for Quentin? Other questions come up, but a great source of information as well to head to is on our website. You'll see a couple of spots. I mean, our website's loaded with a lot of amazing information. A copy of this webinar will also be housed on our website. Just allow a couple of days for that to be up on there for you. But our COVID-19, you can see that highlighted in red there. That's a great place to see all of our up-to-date information relating to anything COVID-19. And then also our special offers. So at the moment, I know that there is a little bit of uncertainty out there for obvious reasons. So what we're offering on these expeditions is actually an interim refund policy. So that will be for these 2 South Australian expeditions and any other expeditions up until the 31st of March. For any new bookings on these, should for any COVID related reasons occur and you can't travel or the cruise doesn't go ahead, you will have the option for a refund. So that's a little bit of a surety in these times. There might be some questions in the chat that I can see maybe as well. Looks like there's a few coming through there. Pricing. Yeah, so there is various levels of pricing dependent on the cabin category and the expedition. On our website, it's a great place. So these locations are loaded up on our website. So just head to that destinations tab and you'll see both of those itineraries on there. For our first expedition, which is the Wild Islands and Walks of South Australia, the lead-in price for that particular category as a twin share is $6,390 per person twin share. And then for the next expedition, which is the across the Great Australian Bight, your lead-in rate on that one will be $8,290 per person twin share. But you can see all of those different rates on our website with the different cabin categories, along with the vessel information also. So you can have a look at the different types of cabin categories and also what the vessels look like inside. You can see that someone has asked if we're looking to repeat these. At this stage, they are in the plan. We don't have confirmed dates or anything like that as yet, but they are definitely in the plan. There's some sensational itineraries, so we would absolutely love to be able to do these again. But at this stage, we haven't released any of the upcoming trips as yet. Yeah, so you can access, I've got a question from one of our travel agents there. You can access those in our travel agents trade resources area, those Facebook tiles. So just head to the very bottom of our website for those social media tiles. But if anyone does have any other questions, I do still have Quentin here as well. Quentin's gone very silent in the background there.
That's all right, Ramona. Yeah, no, it's. I just want to mention, I guess, briefly that the way we put this itinerary together really reflects some of the opportunities we've got to go to remote places, which also keeps us sort of in a very safe zone. So a lot of the places we visit are quite wild, quite remote. So we will be traveling pretty much as a bubble most of the time. So it has a sort of benefit really in terms of being able to access some of these more distant areas, but also keeping ourselves in a kind of sensitive way, not engaging too much with too many communities, so that we're not putting ourselves in any sort of difficult situation. So yeah, I think it works as a very positive opportunity to get out into parts of South Australia, which are very hard to otherwise reach.
Absolutely. And I mean, those two expeditions we have just covered, you can see there is some absolutely amazing wild and remote locations within those. They can be booked as two separate journeys, or if you do have the time up your sleeve, or you can join those expeditions as well. They are designed so that they just follow on and will be subsequent. And if you are going to be joining any expeditions, you can also get an adjoining discount. So just make sure that you do mention that. Yeah, so I've had someone ask about the availability on these cruises. We do still have a very sufficient amount of availability on these expeditions. I think there's the coral decks are among the first to go, but we do still have availability on those expeditions. So absolutely, just either contact our reservations team or your preferred travel agent to arrange those expeditions. And I don't think there's any other questions that have come through, but if anyone does have any other questions, absolutely just shoot myself an email, and if I can't answer that for you, I'll be sure to reach out to Quentin as well. But thank you so much for joining us, Quentin. You're an absolute wealth of information, and we do appreciate you coming along and sharing your knowledge with everybody.
That's fine. Thanks, Ramona. And this is, I'm looking forward to this trip very much. It'll be a very exciting trip for me. I've spent years sailing and cruising these waters, and always keen to get back into some of these remote places. And to be able to do it with the Coral Adventurer will be an extra special opportunity. So looking forward to it very much.
Absolutely, and that's just around the corner for you, isn't it, Quentin, with our first expedition for you. So the Wild Islands and Walks of South Australia will be departing on the 10th of February. I did have someone ask for that once again. And then the Across the Great Australian Bight will be the 21st of February. For those expeditions. So you can download as well a copy of our brochure from the website, or if you're one of our dear travel agents, you can also download that from our trade resources area as well. Don't think we've got any other questions here, guys, but yeah, thank you once again for joining us, and I do hope you have a wonderful day, and feel free to reach out with any other questions that you might have. Thanks so much, guys.